Ever had a solder joint look perfect on the outside, then start dripping the second you turn the water back on? I'll tell you, that moment right there has made more homeowners swear off copper forever, and it didn't have to happen. After 3 decades in the trade, I can promise you this: 9 times out of 10, a leaky solder joint has nothing to do with your torch skills. The leak was baked in before the flame ever touched the pipe. Today, I'm walking you through 5 places your soldered copper joints will fail first, and exactly how to prevent every single one. Number 4 is the one that trips up even guys who've been doing this for years. And stick around for the bonus tip at the end, because that one alone could save a joint you thought was impossible. The first failure point, and the one I've seen wreck more joints than anything else in 30 years, is dirty copper and oxide contamination. Now here's the thing: copper looks clean. It comes off the shelf at the hardware store and it's got that nice bright color and you think you're good to go. You're not. The second copper is exposed to air. It starts forming a layer of oxidation on the surface. You can't always see it, especially inside a fitting cup, but it is there. And that invisible layer of oxide is the #1 reason solder joints fail. Here's why. Solder doesn't bond to oxidized copper. It just won't. It might sit on top of it and look like it took, but there's no actual metallurgical bond happening. The solder needs bare, bright, shiny copper to grab onto. I mean shiny, not sort of clean, not wiped off with a rag. I'm talking bright like a new penny. So here's what you do. Every single time, no exceptions, you take a strip of emery cloth or a piece of plumber's sand cloth and you polish the outside of that pipe end. You go all the way around, about an inch past where the fitting will sit, and you work it until the copper is uniformly bright. No dark spots, no dull patches, all bright. Then you do the inside of the fitting. This is the part people skip, and it's the part that matters just as much. You can use a fitting brush, which is a little wire brush sized to match your pipe diameter. 1/2-inch fitting brush for 1/2-inch fittings, 3/4 inch for 3/4, and so on. You spin that brush inside the fitting cup until the inside is just as bright and shiny as the pipe end. If you don't have a fitting brush, you can fold a piece of emery cloth and work it around the inside by hand, but the brush is faster and more consistent. I'll tell you, the old-timers used to say the joint is made before the torch comes out. They were talking about this step right here. If you get lazy on the polishing, nothing else you do matters. The flux won't work right, the solder won't flow right, and you'll be cutting that joint out and starting over. Shiny is non-negotiable. Make it a habit, and you'll never wonder why a joint failed. The second failure point that catches almost every beginner is an improper cut with unreamed burrs. This one starts at the very beginning of the process, before you even think about cleaning or flux. If your cut isn't square and clean, the joint is already compromised. Now listen, I know a lot of folks reach for a hacksaw when they need to cut copper, and technically, a hacksaw will get through the pipe, but it leaves a ragged, angled cut with metal shavings everywhere, and it's almost impossible to get a perfectly square end. What you want is a tubing cutter. A standard tubing cutter for 1/2-inch and 3/4-inch pipe costs about $12 to $15, and it'll last you the rest of your life. You clamp it on the pipe, snug the wheel down, and rotate. Give it a 1/4 turn of the knob after every couple of rotations. Don't crank it tight all at once, or you'll deform the pipe into an oval, and then it won't seat properly inside the fitting. A good tubing cutter gives you a perfectly square cut every time. That matters because the pipe needs to seat fully and evenly inside the fitting cup. If the cut is angled, one side of the pipe sits deeper than the other, and you get an uneven gap. Solder can't fill an uneven gap reliably, but here's the part that really gets people. After you cut with a tubing cutter, there's a raised burr on the inside edge of the pipe. Every tubing cutter creates it. It's a little ridge of copper that got pushed inward by the cutting wheel. If you leave that burr in there, 2 things happen. First, it disrupts water flow and creates turbulence inside the pipe. which over time can cause erosion and pinhole leaks. Second, and more immediately, that burr can interfere with solder flowing evenly into the joint. Most tubing cutters have a small triangular reaming blade that folds out from the body of the tool. You stick it inside the pipe end and twist it a few times to shave that burr down smooth. Takes about 5 seconds. Some guys use a round file or a deburring tool instead, and that works fine too. The point is, you do it every single time. Cut, ream, then move on to cleaning. That's the order. No shortcuts. The third failure point is flux mistakes, and this one comes in 3 flavors, all of them bad. Too much flux, too little flux, or burned flux. Each one will ruin a joint in its own special way. Let's start with what flux actually does. Flux is an acidic paste that keeps the copper from reoxidizing while you heat it. You just spend all that time polishing everything to bright, shiny copper, and the second that clean surface hits air, oxidation starts creeping back. Flux holds that off long enough for the solder to bond. It also helps the molten solder flow into the joint by reducing surface tension. So it's doing 2 critical jobs at once. Here's how to apply it right. Use a flux brush, which is just a small acid brush, and apply a thin, even coat to both surfaces. That means the outside of the pipe end and the inside of the fitting cup. Thin is the key word. You want complete coverage, but not globs. If you put too much flux on, the excess gets pushed inside the pipe when you assemble the joint. That extra flux is acidic. It will sit inside your pipe and slowly eat away at the copper from the inside out. I've seen pinhole leaks show up 2 or 3 years after installation, and when you cut the pipe open, you can see the acid damage right where excess flux pooled. Too little flux is the opposite problem. If you leave dry spots, those spots will oxidize under heat, and solder won't bond there. You end up with a joint that's sealed on one side and open on the other. It might hold for a week. It might hold for a month, but it will eventually weep. Now the third flavor is the worst, and that's burned flux. When you overheat a joint, the flux turns black and crusty. You'll see it happen. The flux goes from that shiny wet paste to a dark, charred coating. Once flux burns, it's chemically dead. It can't do its job anymore. And any solder you apply over burned flux is just sitting on top of garbage. It's not bonding to anything. The tell is your flame color and the look of the joint. If you see a green tinge in the flame or the flux has gone black, stop. You've gone too far. Let it cool completely, take it apart, clean everything back to bright copper, reflux, and start over. I know that's frustrating. I know you want to just add more solder and hope for the best. Don't. A joint with burned flux will leak. Maybe not today, but it will. By the way, if you're finding this advice helpful, do me a small favor and hit that subscribe button down below. I put out new videos like this one every week, walking you through repairs that'll save you a small fortune in plumber bills. Subscribing is free, and it's the best way to make sure you don't miss the next one. All right, let's continue. The fourth failure point, and this is the one that separates the leaky joints from the professional ones, is wrong heat application and missed capillary action. Most beginners grab the torch and aim the flame right at the spot where they want the solder to go. That's exactly backwards, and it's the single most common torch technique mistake I've seen in 3 decades. Here's the thing about soldering copper. You're not melting solder onto a joint like you're applying glue. You're heating the fitting until it's hot enough to melt solder on contact, and then capillary action does the real work. Capillary action is the physical force that pulls liquid into a tight gap. When you have a properly sized pipe inside a properly sized fitting, there's a tiny uniform space between them. When that fitting gets hot enough, solder touching that gap gets drawn in by capillary action. It flows all the way around the joint, even upward against gravity. The solder follows the heat. So the technique is this. You aim your torch flame at the body of the fitting, not at the joint line and not at the solder. You're heating the fitting cup. Move the flame around to distribute heat evenly. On a half-inch fitting, this takes maybe 15 to 20 seconds with a standard propane torch. on 3/4 inch, a little longer. Now here are the tells that let you know what's happening. First, you'll hear the flux start to sizzle. That means you're getting warm, but you're not there yet. Keep going. Then you touch your solder to the joint, not into the flame but to the edge where the pipe meets the fitting. If the fitting is hot enough, the solder will melt instantly on contact and get sucked right into the joint. You'll see it disappear into that gap like magic. That's capillary action doing exactly what it's supposed to do. If the solder just sits there and blobs up, the fitting isn't hot enough yet. Pull the solder away, keep heating, and try again in a few seconds. And between you and me, patience here is everything. Rushing this step is how you end up with cold joints that look soldered but aren't sealed. The flip side is overheating. If you keep blasting the fitting after the solder is ready to flow, you'll burn the flux, which we just talked about. You'll also cause the solder to run right through and out the other side of the joint, leaving you with a thin, weak bond. The green flame and blackened paste are your warning signs. Respect them. One more thing on lead-free solder. If you learned to solder back in the old days with 50-50 lead and tin, you need to know that modern lead-free solder behaves differently. It runs hotter and it's less forgiving. It doesn't flow as smoothly as the old stuff. You need a little more heat to get it moving, but you also have a narrower window before you overheat. Take your time. Feel it out on a practice joint before you go working on live plumbing. The fifth and final failure point, and one that will drive you absolutely crazy if you don't know about it, is moisture in the line. This is the invisible joint killer. You can do everything else perfectly. Square cut, clean reamed, polished to bright copper, fluxed properly, heated correctly. And if there's even a single drop of water in that pipe, the joint will fail. Here's why. When water hits the temperature of a joint being soldered, it turns to steam. Steam expands. It creates little pockets and bubbles inside the molten solder. When the joint cools, those pockets become pinholes, tiny little voids in the solder ring that water will find eventually. Sometimes immediately. Sometimes a month later when the temperature changes and the copper expands just enough. I've seen journeymen with decades of experience lose a joint to a trickle of water they couldn't get stopped. It doesn't take much. A slow drip from upstream, condensation, water trapped in a low spot of a horizontal run. Any of it will ruin your day. So how do you deal with it? First, always drain the line as completely as you can. Open the lowest faucet in the house and the highest one to let air push the water down and out. Then open the valve or cut the pipe at the spot you're working on and give it time to drain. But sometimes the water just won't stop. Maybe it's a long horizontal run with a slight belly. Maybe there's a fixture above that keeps feeding a slow drip. This is where the bread trick comes in, and I'll tell you, the first time I saw my Uncle Ray do this, I thought he'd lost his mind. You take a piece of plain white bread, no crust, and you tear off a small wad. You stuff that wad up into the pipe, upstream of where you're soldering. Push it in about 6 to 8 inches with a pencil or a dowel rod. That bread acts as a dam. It absorbs the trickle and holds it back just long enough for you to heat and solder the joint. When you turn the water back on, the bread dissolves completely and flushes out through the nearest faucet. It's gone. No residue, no clogs. Just remove the aerator on that faucet first so the breadcrumbs don't get caught in the screen. Use only plain white bread. No whole wheat, no seeds, no sourdough. Just basic white bread. It sounds ridiculous, and it works every single time. Now, a couple more things on safety before we wrap up the items. Whenever you're soldering near wood framing, insulation, or anything that can burn, use a flame protector cloth behind the joint. It's a heat-resistant pad that costs a few dollars and clips right behind where you're working. Don't rely on just being careful. One slip of the torch, and you've got a smoldering 2x4 inside your wall. Keep a charged fire extinguisher within arm's reach. Not in the garage, not in the kitchen. Right there next to you. And after you finish, Check behind walls and in cavities for any signs of heat or smoke before you walk away. Check again 30 minutes later. House fires from soldering don't always start immediately. And finally, always pressure test your joints before you close up a wall or ceiling. Turn the water on, pressurize the system, and go look at every single joint you soldered. Wipe them with a dry rag or paper towel. If the towel comes back wet, you've got a weep. Fix it now, not after the drywall goes up. And one nice finishing touch. While a joint is still hot, take a dry rag and give the solder a quick wipe around the base of the fitting. It smooths out any drips and gives you that clean, professional look. You'll know a pro did this work. All right, now for the bonus tip I've been holding on to. And this one goes back to the very foundation of everything we just talked about. Before you ever pick up a torch on live plumbing in your house, go buy a 5-foot stick of 1/2-inch copper and a bag of 1/2-inch copper couplings. They cost almost nothing. Take them to your workbench or your garage and practice. Cut, ream, polish, flux, assemble, and solder 5 joints in a row. Cut them open with your tubing cutter after they cool and look at the inside. You'll see exactly how the solder flowed. You'll see if there are voids. You'll see if you burned the flux. You'll learn more from cutting open 5 practice joints than from watching 100 videos. There's no pressure, no water in the line, no risk of flooding your kitchen. Just you, the copper, and the torch, getting your hands right before it counts. That's how my Uncle Ray taught me, and that's how I'm teaching you. Before you go, if you got something out of this video, do me one last favor and hit that subscribe button. I put out new videos every week covering real-world plumbing repairs, money-saving tips, and the kind of know-how that takes years to pick up on the job. Subscribing costs you nothing, and it makes sure these videos show up in your feed when you need them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.